closely.
And the order, and that concludes question time. Prior to the lunch break, the House was considering the first reading of the Border Processing Trade Single Window and Duties Bill, and the Honourable Phil Goff was speaking, and he has 6 minutes 31 seconds, should he wish to use it.
All 6 minutes and 31 seconds of it, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, before the break we were debating this riveting piece of legislation called the Border Processing Trade Single Window and Duties Bill. And that bill, Mr Speaker, amends the Customs and Excise Act 1996 and the Biosecurity Act 1993 to support the implementation of the Trade Single Window component of the Joint Border Management System. Now, Mr Speaker, these are ideas and concepts that were introduced initially under a Labor government. It's not hugely controversial legislation. Labor is intending to support it, but lo and behold, when the bill came up for introduction, who was the minister introducing it but Craig Foss, the minister in charge of NovoPay? Now, Mr Speaker, the Joint Border Management System is an IT system. It's designed to replace outdated systems in customs and in biosecurity in the Ministry of Primary Industries. And when I saw Craig Foss, the man responsible for the debacle over NovoPay, get up to introduce this bill, I almost recommended to Reno Tirakartni that we change our mind on whether we support it. Because after that debacle, how could we have confidence in this IT system, which is in fact the biggest single investment probably ever made by the Ministry of Customs? Mr Speaker, a year after NovoPay, there are still bungles that haven't been sorted out, and we've spent tens of millions of dollars more than were budgeted for a system that's failed. So how could we have confidence in this system? And then I read, Mr Speaker, that the actual agency, the IT agency that's supplying the goods is IBM. Now, IBM was the agency just over 12 years ago that was responsible for the police INSA system. The police INSA system, Mr Speaker, because I think you were here at the time, cost $100 million, and at the end of it, they threw it away. $100 million of wasted investment. And I thought between the combined influence of Craig Foss and the track record of the National Party in time and again getting it wrong, should we really be supporting this legislation? Now, I thought, look, let's be fair about it. Labor brought about the introduction of this legislation, and it's designed to give Customs and the Ministry of Primary Industries, sir, better information and risk assessment tools for targeting higher risk trade and passengers. And I think passengers for Mr John Hayes, who said that this had nothing to do with people, the Joint Border Management System, of course, does include passengers, though this tranche deals with goods and services. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm particularly worried as to whether this legislation, which is inherently good legislation, will be undermined by cuts that are being made to border security and biosecurity. Well, Mr Hayes shakes his head, but in 2009, they, of course, sacked 54 biosecurity officers from around the airports and the ports of this country. That was 2009. 2010, 18 months later, we had PSA in this country. PSA that has cost this country tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And John Hayes knows that. So what I want to say to this government is that they're penny wise and pound foolish. They will try to make cost cuts to save a little bit of money in the short term, only to find that the long-term costs and risks to this country are immense. And then we saw the budget this year, Mr Speaker, in terms of biosecurity, and they'd chopped another $6 million out of the budget. Now, you can bring in whatever border security IT system you like, but if at the same time you're undermining biosecurity by cutting costs and cutting the officers that are working hard to protect New Zealand and its agriculture and its exports and its lifestyle, then you're wasting your money on this legislation. So I ask the government, how can we be confident that we will not see further botch-ups? because, Mr Speaker, at the same time as we're introducing this legislation, we have seen restructuring of the Ministry of Primary Industry and the Food Safety Authority. At the same time as that was happening, we saw an unprecedented failure in terms of quality assurance about our export goods. On DCD, on botulism or the suspected botulism, on nitrates, on meat exports that sit on the wharves. And I say again to this government, yes, it's been smart enough to pick up Labor's idea on this legislation, but not smart enough to stop cost-cutting where it affects New Zealand's vital interests, and not smart enough not to restructure departments so that they no longer work. Food Safety Authority is a classic example of that. I could talk about the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, where they lost their key trade negotiators, Mr Hayes, and now John Key is saying maybe we've got to go out and recruit some. Of course you've got to go out and recruit some, because the botched restructuring saw some of the best people, and Mr Hayes knows this to be the truth, some of the best people in the trade negotiation area lost. Mr Speaker, the trade single window as a concept is a good idea. It will enable businesses to complete border requirements for customs, food and biosecurity purposes through one electronic transaction. It will make compliance easier. It is better in providing risk-related information, and for that reason Labor will support this bill despite the bungling and the botch-ups of the government that has done so much damage in other areas of biosecurity and trade.
Washed up and hopeless.
Mr Speaker.
Dr Jan Yang. Order. Order.